Hi guys, welcome to my channel and we're watching the fourth part of body fluids and circulation. Today we'll finish the cardiac cycle, electrocardiograph and the composition of blood vessels. So yeah, let's get started. As you can see, I haven't really erased the diagram I made in the last class because I'm lazy. I'm not going to make it again. But anyways, let's get started with the cardiac cycle. Okay, so we learned about the anatomy of the heart. We learned about what each of these vessels and atria and ventricle are basically. Now let's learn how does this blood exactly circulate in the heart. Okay, let's get started first with Vena Cava. This is the entire cycle of how blood comes into the heart and goes out of the heart. So just keep listening. So you have this Vena Cava. From the lower part of the body, the inferior Vena Cava collects all the deoxygenated blood and it pumps it into the right atrium. And from the upper part of the heart, upper part of the body, the superior Vena Cava collects all the deoxygenated blood and pumps it into the right atrium. Right atrium for deoxygenated blood, and it comes from Vena Cava. Okay, and at this point, right atrium is pretty relaxed. Matlab pura heart is in a very relaxed state. Okay, so I'm just gonna mention about the right side, but you should always know that the same thing is happening in the left side also. Okay, so I'm just gonna start talking about the right side. So they're in a joint diastole. Diastole matlab relaxed state. It is not contracting. You know, heart is a muscular organ which contracts to pump blood. But diastole matlab diastole. So starting में the entire heart is in a joint diastole. मतलब सब कुछ relaxed है. Vena cava से the deoxygenated blood is being pumped into right atrium. And at this time the tricuspid valves are also open. So जो भी blood right atrium में आ रहा है, it's going into the right ventricle too. But the semilunar valves are those valves which guard the entry of blood from ventricle to the pulmonary artery. Okay, so the semilunar valves are closed. That means blood sirf andar aa raha hai, it's not going out of the heart. Okay, so blood is coming from right atrium to right ventricle. At this point, the sinoatrial node is there now here. This node, it generates an action potential. Action potential, I told you, it is about 70 to 75 beats for sinoatrial node. So it generates an action potential. Usse kya hota hai? This right atrium, it contracts. So when it contracts, so obviously if you take a bottle and you squish it, the amount of water that's coming out from it increases, right? So similarly, जब ये ऐसे contract होता है, the amount of blood entering the right ventricle increases by 30%, and that time this tricuspid and bicuspid are obviously open. After that, the pressure inside the ventricle becomes really high, and at that point these tricuspid bicuspid they get closed. That's because the blood should not go back into the right atrium because ventricle is contracting. Okay, so ventricle is contracting, these two valves are closed, but the blood has to move out of the heart because pressure zyada ho raha hai. So at that time, this blood it pushes open the semilunar valves and enters the pulmonary artery. So that means tricuspid, bicuspid, they close, and the blood from the right ventricle will push open the semilunar valves and it will move to the pulmonary artery. Now, how does this vein exactly contract? That is because this AV node, it passes the action potential via the bundle of His to the Purkinje fibers, and it spreads throughout the ventricular musculature. Matlab pura idhar. So that time these are closed and semilunar valves open, and the blood goes into the semilunar valves, into pulmonary artery on the right side and into the aorta on the left side. So basically, this contraction is known as systole. So let's just go through the cycle again. First, there is a joint diastole of the entire heart. Okay, when blood enters the atrium, then it moves into the ventricles, and it moves into the ventricle when these atria, they contract, and this contraction is known as systole. So there is atrial systole, and then it moves to the ventricle. Now there is a ventricular systole. When this ventricle is contracting, this atria is relaxing. Matlab blood is already being pumped. You know that heart ka pumping, the whole process happens within seconds or less than a second. So that happens because जब ventricle से the blood is moving to pulmonary artery, at that time, the second time, the blood which is coming again from vena cava is already being pumped into right atrium. So everything happens together, but we're just learning it separately. Okay, so then it comes into the ventricle. Ventricle undergoes another systole, and then it moves out to the arteries, aorta and pulmonary artery. And after all of that, finally the semilunar valves, they close. That is because blood has gone from the ventricle to the pulmonary artery, but it can't flow back to the ventricle. So that's why the semilunar valves, they get closed. Tricuspid, bicuspid get opened because the blood which was already being filled in this increases the pressure, and it gets opened and it moves into the right ventricle, and the whole process is repeated again. So that is, it starts from joint diastole, it moves to atrial systole, then ventricular systole, and then again it moves to joint diastole. Okay, this is the cardiac cycle. Okay, that is it about cardiac cycle. Now let's learn about the various blood volumes. So the sequential events by which blood is pumped in the heart is known as cardiac cycle. You can learn the exact definition from Ncert. Apart from that, the duration of cardiac cycle is 0.8 seconds. Matlab, this whole process, it happens in less than 1 second, that is 0.8 seconds. And the amount of blood that moves from one ventricle to the arteries, pulmonary artery or aorta, in one cardiac cycle is 70 ml, and this 70 ml is known as stroke volume. Stroke volume. And we already know that the heart beats about 70 to 75 times in 1 minute. So the cardiac output is the amount of blood coming from one ventricle in 1 minute will basically be 70 ml multiplied by 72. Okay, so stroke volume into heartbeat or heart rate will give you the cardiac output, that is about 5 liter or 500 ml. Just multiply 70 into 72 will almost be about 5000 milliliters. Okay, and let's talk about the heart sounds now. So you know that heartbeat हमें सुनाई देता है whenever you put a stethoscope. Now where does this sound come from? I'll tell you. It is because these valves are being open and closed. So whenever these valves close, it makes a sound. The first sound, that is lub dub. You know the sound is lub dub. We've already बहुत बार सुना होगा कि heart का normal sound is like lub dub lub dub. So anyways, so first the valves which are being closed are the tricuspid and bicuspid valves. So when these valves get closed, you get the sound lub, and when semilunar valves are closed, you get the sound dub. So that is how you can hear the heart sound. Now let's go to ECG or electrocardiogram. Okay. So movies में तो देखा होगा कि there's this one screen when someone's dying, it just becomes constant. So that's basically measuring the electrical activity of your heart. So electrocardiogram is the graphical representation of the electrical activity of the heart. Graphical representation. And electrocardiograph is the instrument which is used to measure the electrocardiogram. Okay, and it looks like this. I think I should erase the board a bit. Yeah. So electrocardiogram is obtained when you place 3 receptors. One is at both of your wrists and one is at your left ankle. So they measure the electrical activity of your heart. Suppose, and why is this so is because you know when you have to measure pulse, you obviously do this because the artery is prominent here and you can actually feel the pulse. So similarly, even in your left ankle and both your wrists, you place these receptor kind of things which measure the electrical activity, and the graph looks something like, okay, P, Q, R, S, T. Okay, now how you have to remember this is, the first process क्या होता है? Atrial systole, है ना? मतलब atrium is contracted. So this P wave is known as atrial depolarization. Okay, and now the second thing क्या है? Ventricular systole. So this QRS complex is known as ventricular depolarization. And end में there is a joint diastole, or basically ventricles when they relax, it provides the T wave, that is ventricular repolarization. So P, atrial depolarization, QRS, ventricular depolarization, and T will give you ventricular repolarization. Just remember it with reference to your cardiac cycle. So it's very easy to remember. You just have to remember this. And yeah, that's about electrocardiogram. Now let's come to the layers of blood vessels. So you know blood vessels दो type के होते हैं, arteries and ventricles, and they have 3 different layers. The innermost layer, tunica interna, is made up of simple squamous epithelium. Now, what is the function of simple squamous epithelium? That is diffusion of gases or exchange of materials, because it's very thin. So the internal layer, tunica interna, is made up of simple squamous epithelium. Now, always the middle layer, it's usually associated with muscles. So that's how you can remember it. The middle tunica media is a layer made up of smooth muscles, and it has elastic fibers in it. And the last outermost layer is tunica externa. It's made up of connective tissues with collagen fibers. So that's all you have to remember for the layers of blood vessels. And we're done for today's class, and we'll be starting with the electrical activity, the neural coordination of the heart, and also about double circulation, the pulmonary and systemic part of the heart, and the diseases associated with our circulatory system in the next class. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with the people who you think it can help. Thank you so much for watching.